Following program is sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts. Welcome to About Money, a different approach to investing you won't hear anywhere else. Your host, Mike Adams, is a registered investment advisor and works with investment portfolios exceeding over $100,000 in net worth and has a proven track record of managing long-term investments, surpassing the markets in the long term. The information shared in the following program is for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. And now, here's Mike.
It is Saturday, and we're going to be talking about money. Benjamin Franklin once said there was a discovery that's more important than the discovery of a new star. You know what that was? Stay tuned. We'll get there. At the turn of the 19th century into the 20th century, one of the biggest issues was manure. You know, there may be an analogy to that problem and an investment opportunity today. Want to know more? There's a lot of words I could use to describe that, but I'll stay away from that for now. You know when wine was first made? 8,000 years ago. It's a very important industry in the U.S. and a very important industry in Washington. My guest today will tell us a lot more about it. That's coming later in the program. I know last week when I ran out of time, I said I would talk about rebalancing in portfolios, but as I prepared the outline for today, I found out that I had more information than I could really get to, and so rebalancing's got to wait for next week. So stay tuned for next week. We'll talk some about rebalancing. These are more important. Lawrence Sedita was retired. He was 74 years old. He'd retired from being a carpenter. He was living in Las Vegas, according to the New York Times. He has Parkinson's disease, and his wife has cancer. He lost his medical insurance, and his medication was costing him $3,000 every month. He found out that he couldn't afford to take the medication he needed for Parkinson's disease. His wife with cancer was finding she couldn't take the medications she needed. And so what did they do? What did they do? They filed for bankruptcy. And they're not alone. The rate of people over the age of 65 filing for bankruptcy is 3 times today what it was in 1961. And it's not just for one reason. It's for several reasons. Pensions have been vanishing. Medical costs are soaring. And there's not enough money that a lot of people have saved to cover those expenses and other expenses. Studies are showing now that the government has moved away from guaranteeing pensions and medical, and they're shifting the responsibility of retirement to the private individual. And that's what we're seeing today. More bankruptcies, more people running out of money, more fear in individuals that they're not going to have enough money to retire on, not going to have enough money to reach the end of their age. They're going to run out of money before they run out of time. And all this ties into something that I think is a myth about investing. And the myth is this. It seems to be that people believe there's a choice between capital preservation and growth. Do you choose to preserve your capital, or do you prefer to grow it? And I believe the missing component of that, the missing component is time. It depends upon how much time you have for the money that you have. If you need funds in a month or 6 months or 2 years, that's one situation. But most investors have a much longer time frame. Even retirees, today if you're 65, you can expect to live into your 90s. That's 25 years. The outlook today is the same concerning capital preservation and growth as it was when I got into the business in the mid-1980s. My father died in 1978. He was 61, anticipating he was going to retire in 1962, not 1962, when he was 62. And he looked at his retirement options because he had a company pension. And one of the options was a 5-year annuity so that his entire pension amount would be paid out in 5 years. And there was a reason for that, because most people, once they retired in the 1970s, most of the people didn't live much beyond retirement age. That's all changed. Most retirees today are just reaching a point where they're reaching middle age practically. They've got a lot of years. Some are taking on second careers, some are traveling, some are enjoying retirement, and according to statistics, 45% of men intend to continue working. Retirees and people reaching the ages of 60 and even 50, they have 20, 30, 40, 50 years before they end their time. And the myth is that capital preservation is different from growth. If you look at 3% inflation, that cuts into a portfolio in half over 25 years. If you have no growth, and if inflation stays at 3%, and I believe it's going to grow even at a higher rate than 3%, but over 25 years, that'll cut a portfolio in half. Portfolios actually need growth. I look at my portfolios. Since the bottom in 2009, my client portfolios have grown at an average of 17.1% compounded every year. Standard & Poor's, even somebody investing in the Standard & Poor's, is 10.3% compounded over those years. And in an index fund, probably close to 10%. So what does that mean in dollars? At 17.1% over 9 years, that'll grow 100,000 to 438,000. 10.3% over 9 years will grow 100,000 to 248,000. 10% or 100,000 put into the bank 9 years ago will grow to less than 103,000. Considering inflation, somebody that put their money into CDs in the bank has gone backward, not forward. And while I say that my returns are 17.1%, there's a variation. Conservative portfolios have not grown that much, and aggressive portfolios have grown more than that. But it's first thing to do is to pick the right manager and understand there is not a choice between preserving capital and growth. It's a matter of doing both. It's a matter of time. That's the first thing I wanted to cover today. The second thing is, so what was it that Ben Franklin said was of greater importance than the discovery of a new star? Ben Franklin said it was the discovery of wine. After all, Franklin said, the universe is full of stars. Wine is a significant industry. The first wine that was produced, the discovery of wine, happened in the country of Georgia 8,000 years ago. Now, Georgia is a very small country. It's halfway around the world. It borders Turkey and Armenia and Azerbaijan to the south and Russia to the north. It's about half the size of the American state of Georgia. It's a pretty small country, 5 million people. If you saw the movie Argo, which was a movie that was, I think, movie of the year, or close to movie of the year a few years ago, it was about the Argonauts. Actually, it was about taking the hostages out of Iran, but the theme was they wanted to do a movie about the Argonauts because Iran is just to the south of Georgia, just to the south of Armenia and Azerbaijan. And the idea of the Argonauts is Jason was a Greek who led the Argonauts, and they were searching for the Golden Fleece. And the Golden Fleece was in the country of Georgia. It wasn't called Georgia, it was called Cochise at the time. But Jason and the Argonauts were put under a spell. They went to sleep. And it was Medea, the princess daughter of the king, who made potions. And she made a potion that recovered Jason and the Argonauts from their spell. We get our word medicine from Medea, who made those potions. But anyway, back to wine, which is more important. Wine was made in 6000 BC, but very different from making wine the way we make it today. There's two methods of making wine, the Georgian method and the French method. The Georgian method consists of putting the wine into large ceramic vats or jars, pottery jars, first made in a city called KLFE. It's in different sizes, sometimes 8 foot by 6 foot across. The ceramic jugs are coated with beeswax, and the grapes are crushed and thrown into the vats, including the seeds and the skins, and it ferments with the seeds and the skin. I understand that a lot of the tannins come from the seeds and the skins, and that then is covered and left to ferment. There was one vat that was discovered in the old capital city 1,000 years ago. It was 1,000 years old. The city held a soiree and drank the wine. I wasn't there, but they said it was good. Anyway, we're coming to a commercial break. I'll finish the story because we just got started about wine, and you want to hear what my guest has to say. Ben Smith of Cadence Wine. And that's not one that's made in ceramic vats. It's one that you can buy off the shelves. It's a great wine. He's going to tell us more about it. We'll be right back after this commercial break. Don't go away.
More about money coming up with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. About Money continues. Remember the website, adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
So I've been talking about wine. Wine first made 8,000 years ago in the country of Georgia, that small country that is in the center of Asia, Europe, borders Turkey, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Russia to the north. That's where wine was first discovered. Today they grow 400 varieties of grapes, of which very few can actually travel. Saperavi is one of those. If you look at the Georgian table, when they have a kind of banquet kind of thing, they have very small plates like we do. And they'll probably have 20 or 30 or 40 different small plates. And I'm a red wine drinker. But with the Georgian meal, the white wine actually goes better with most of it. But we'll get to that. From Georgia, it spread to Egypt and into the Levant, where Israel and Iran. And when the Greeks came along with Alexander the Great, they began to spread winemaking throughout the Greek Empire. That was almost 5,000 years after the wine was first made. The Greek settlers moved it all the way to Gaul in 500 BC. That's eastern France, a region we call Burgundy now, Bourgogne. They brought winemaking there, obviously using the Georgian method in the ceramic vats, but in the Burgundy region, they began to prune the grape plants. They began to transport that wine because as Rome rose, the Roman aristocracy drank white wine. The soldiers drank red wine. And to transport the wine, what they did, the Gauls, the early French, the Romans, to transport the wine, they began to transport it in oak barrels. They began to realize, as they made the oak barrels, that there was a reason to transport it in oak barrels. But it wasn't until a lot of those lands transferred into the church that region really began to produce wine. It began the great Pinots, actually. The monks and the monasteries began to take over and grow the wines, and they began to become specialists in growing the wines. And the Pinot grape, they began to realize The different grapes made better wines. And that region grew up making Pinots, primarily Pinots, some Gamay, some of the other wines that were made. But that region was controlled by the church. And so in the 1600s, the beginning of the 1600s, when Louis the 14th, Louis XIV, came to power. He came to power following many years of war. And the French treasury was exhausted. The French didn't have silver and gold. And so he appointed Jean-Baptiste Colbert as his treasury chief. And I've talked about that on the radio before. Jean-Baptiste Colbert realized that they needed to do something to build a navy. And he began to plant oak trees, and he began to fill in a region that we now call Bordeaux. And he also wanted to get away. Jean-Baptiste Colbert hated the church, and the church hated him. He wanted to make something that would compete with the wines that were made by the monasteries and the abbeys in eastern France. And so they began to plant vines in Bordeaux. And now you know the rest of the story. That became the area for making great wines. That's the background. And of course, today, we make some of the world's greatest wines right here in the state of Washington. My guest today is Ben Smith of Cadence Winery. Welcome to the program, Ben.
Thank you very much, Mike. It's good to be here.
This is the second time Ben's been on the program. He was on the program a long, long time ago. So why don't we start with your background?
14 years as a Boeing mechanical engineer. Segued into winemaking back in 1998, commercially. And now I am out of Boeing and into winemaking full-time.
You were part of the Boeing Winemakers Club.
I was. At the time, there were about 250 very dedicated winemakers buying about 50 tons of grapes from the greatest vineyards in Washington State. The club was founded around 1978, grew up with the great vineyards, Paul Champoux vineyard, Clipson, Sylva Cheval, and those relationships continue today. I became head of procurement at the Boeing Club, made wine from 17 different vineyards, entered it in their competition where there were 400 entries every year, took best of show in 95, 96, and 97, and at that point, what I'd hoped would be this wonderful Boeing career was a little less than that, and wine is always romantic and interesting, and my very business-savvy wife decided it might actually make us some money, so we started the winery in 98.
And today you produce 2,200 cases?
That's correct, 2,200 cases of wine. They are all reds. They are all from Red Mountain, all Bordeaux blends, as you mentioned, the Bordeaux wines earlier, and just 5 different wines.
So talk to us about a Bordeaux blend.
A Bordeaux blend is essentially any blend made up of the 5 main Bordeaux grapes: Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, Merlot, Petit Verdot, Malbec sometimes gets in the mix as well, but not at our winery.
Mm-hmm. So what is the reason to do a blend? You know, I can remember in the 1990s, most people talked about either a Cabernet or a Merlot or a Pinot. And if you really were in an Italian restaurant, sometimes you had Sangiovese. But most of the time it was 3 varieties, and today it's blends.
Blends, you find certain grapes that complement each other, and in Bordeaux, that family of grapes has a diverse set of flavors, but when added together, they're more than the sum of the parts. There's a, not overly fond of the word synergy, but there's a real synergy that happens when you blend great Cabernet with great Cabernet Franc, with Merlot, with Petit Verdot. The wine expands. It gets more complex. It's far more than just the individual components.
Mm-hmm. Especially if you drink a little Petit Verdot, it's not very flavorful.
Some of them could be, well, on their own, they're one-dimensional. But in a blend, that one dimension adds a different dimension.
Mm-hmm. So talk to us. You started out by buying your fruit,
Yes.
by buying the grapes.
Yes.
You don't buy your grapes.
I still buy fruit. So back in the early days, it was, we started with the Taptail Vineyard on Red Mountain, Larry Pearson's vineyard. It's a beautiful place. We started with Spring Valley out in Walla Walla, and that went away, and we added Sealdershall and Clipson on Red Mountain. But working with established vineyards is, for a young winemaker, the only access to old fruit. You can't instantly create a 50-year-old vineyard of your own. A lot of people would be doing it. So having access to older vine fruit gives a young winemaker a leg up on just planting your own vineyard first. So that's what we did. And then we added our own vineyard in 2004. We had bought the property in 97, waited 7 years to get the right to drill the well, the agricultural water right, planted it in 2004, and first harvest from our own vineyard was 2006. And you fast forward to 2018, and this will be the 13th vintage off the vineyard, and presto, I've got an old vineyard now.
So you're still buying fruit from Taptail?
Yes, I am.
Which is some great fruit.
It's wonderful vineyard, planted in 1985.
And managing your vineyard, you have?
Dick Boucher, one of the great growers in Washington State, agreed to manage our vineyard back in 2014. And Dick's been at it for, 25, 30 years. He's incredibly knowledgeable, incredibly friendly and fun to be around, and a level-headed harvest time, which is always good at this time of year. So yeah, Dick's doing our management for us.
And he's grown some great fruit.
And he still does in mid-Yakima Valley. So his vineyards are about 25, 30 miles from Red Mountain, but he was enticed to come over to the hill because of the quality of the vineyards on the hill, and he wanted to get a crack at working with some different growing conditions than in mid-Yakima Valley. So now he's on the hill as well as at his own place.
So I understand when you talk about the number of critics, that the average vineyard in Washington has more, or if you combine all the vineyards, they have more wines rated 90 plus than any other area in the world.
We are blessed with some of the greatest vineyard sites in the world, and winemakers who are conscientious of that and want to make the best wine they can. So as a result, you don't have a sea of lesser wine being made in this state. They're all of a certain quality. So that ratio of quality to price is very much in our favor, and the critics recognize that.
Yeah. I can remember I started buying wine in Eastern Washington when there were 9 wineries, and my daughter once came to me and she said she had a friend whose mother was coming to Walla Walla. Could I recommend wines? And I said, of course. What should she visit? I looked and there were over 400. But today, 940, right?
That is correct. The number of wineries in Washington is still growing.
Yeah. We're coming to a commercial break. Don't go away. We want to talk more about wine when we come back. It's a great subject. It's a great industry. It is really crucial to the state of Washington. And if you enjoy great food and great wine, you want to hear what we have to say. We're coming right back. And after we finish this, I want to talk about climate change and manure. What do they have in common? We're going to be talking about that. Don't go away. But first, wine.
More about money coming up with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. About Money continues. Remember the website, adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
So I'm here with Ben Smith of Cadence Winery. We've been talking about wine. I want to pick it up and talk about the wines that you produce. You produce 5 types, right?
That is correct.
5 blends.
So we were the first winery in Washington to do nothing but vineyard designated Bordeaux blends. What all that means is that everything you buy from one of our bottles is from one vineyard. We love showing off the incredible sites that are in this state. So we do a blend called Tapped Heel Vineyard, predominantly Cabernet Sauvignon. We do one from its neighbor 2.5 miles down the hill, Ciel de Cheval Vineyard, that is equal parts Cab Franc with a little Merlot and Petit Verdot. And then from our own Caramilla Vineyard, I do two wines. One is driven by Cabernet Sauvignon, primarily in the blend. That is called Camerata. The other is predominantly Cabernet Franc. It is called Bel Canto. And then, in blunt terms, I guess, the leftovers go into a wine we make called Coda, and that's the only wine we make that's a blend of all three vineyards. But it ends up being a great value because it's at an easier price point, and it's fruit from three of the best vineyards in Washington.
And all those wines are very, very good. I can attest to that.
Thank you, sir.
I have those wines in my cellar, and we'll be adding more. So tell us about your event in October.
So every year in October, we have an open house to celebrate the release of the new vintage. It will be the third weekend, I believe, in October this year, from 11 to 5 p.m. Check our website, cadencewinery.com, for more information when we get it updated with the date. But we'll be releasing the 2015 vintage. We tend to hold our wine quite a long time to let it be more approachable, more ready to drink on release. So this is the 2000 vintage that will be premiering in late October.
And so I want to talk also about the distribution.
Do we have any beer? No. No, distribution is a vital part of almost every winery's quiver of sales channels. We do about 50% of our business through distribution in eight primary states outside of Washington State. But it's a more challenging game than it was 20 years ago when we started the winery, in that 20 years ago there were 4,000 distributors nationally among the 50 states. Consolidation and other events have whittled that number down to about 1,500 national distributors. So they're all bigger. They're getting bigger as they consume smaller distributors and their portfolios. Makes it more challenging to find the right size fit for a winery that only does 2,200 cases a year.
And with a lot of small vineyards in eastern Washington, it's become a real issue, hasn't it?
It has become a real issue. Finding a distributor who wants to sell your wine rather than just have your name in their portfolio is a challenge. So we vet our distributors very carefully. We go out and meet with them. We talk as seriously as we can about sales goals before we ink any deal with any distributor.
And a lot of times when you buy a wine in a restaurant, the restaurant's making more money than you are. Is that right?
Oh, I guess that's probably the case, yes. I will not begrudge them that because I have so many restaurants in Seattle that are great fans of our wine. They promote our wine. They sell it to someone. They love the bottle. They go home. They go to their local wine shop or online and say, I love that bottle of Ciel de Cheval we had last night at dinner. I would like to buy some more of it. So they come to us. They come to other retailers. It's a great, once again, synergy, but it's a great working together of all these different parts to sell wine.
I guess where I'm really going with the whole thing is the best way to buy your wine is to go direct.
I would not argue with that at all. So we are Cadence Winery. We have an online storefront where you can purchase our wine. We ship when the temperatures are appropriate nationally. We can deliver ourselves within Seattle. So there are a lot of ways to get a hold of our wine, but buying it through us guarantees the provenance of the wine, guarantees that it's been stored correctly, and who knows, I might even meet you when I knock on your door to deliver.
So talk to us about the quality of wine, because you've got a wine that has a significant high quality.
Well, that's hard for a guy who doesn't who's poorer at self-promotion than he really ought to be. But I've been winemaker of the year from one of the local Seattle magazine called me winemaker of the year back in 2012. We've had many wines rated 95 and higher from national critics, and not just one national critic, but the Wine Spectator or the Wine Advocate or the Wine Enthusiast or Vinous with Stephen Tanzer. So our wines are reviewed by a broad array of critical palates, and the nice part for the consumer is that many of these palates like our wine. We appeal to a broad range of palates. We don't make wine in a specific style that one guy doesn't like and the other guy loves. It tends to be classically structured, and folks, critical palates across the spectrum like it. So,
and for wines that are rated in the mid-90s, plus or minus 95, I think the pricing is excellent as well.
Well, our top bottles are $60. The mid-level is $45, and Cote is $27.50 or $28. So, my wife and I set out to make sure that family and friends could buy our wine. We didn't want to price it so esoterically that people we know and love are priced out of our wine. That's silly. It is 750 milliliters of grape juice in the end. There's a sanity check that we use when we price our wine.
So I've heard things like there's been a study that's been done that showed that women that drink red wine over a period of time lose 10 pounds. Is that correct?
I wholeheartedly endorse that study. The health benefits of wine are clear and manifold. Many benefits to drinking red wine, white wine in moderation. That asterisk is always in moderation. But yes, it can be part of a very healthy lifestyle.
I've heard that like 98% of wine that's purchased is consumed the same day.
Well, if I put my sales and marketing hat on, that's wonderful because they like it. They want to come back and buy more. Yeah. But it is true that a vast majority of wine is consumed day of. However, if, dear listener, you enjoy softer tannins or more aromatically complex wine, aged wine, let it go 5 years, 10 years, 15. Our wines can age up to 20 years in a cool cellar, and you're getting more for your money when you age our wine. The textural components become ever so silky. The aromatics are just roses and beautiful tobacco, in a good way. And it's a completely different wine than it was when it was youthful. But it's, as far as I'm concerned, it's more what it should be. So you're getting more for that value if you age our wine.
I have to say that I'm now drinking your 2007.
Fantastic.
And what you say is true.
Fantastic.
It does improve with age. But even for somebody who wants to buy some wine and let it sit in their kitchen for a while, buying 6 bottles or 12 bottles and letting it sit there, if you want to age it for 3 years or 5 years or 10 years, it's probably a seller. But if you're just talking about wine that you really, really like and can store it for 6 months, I think buying 6 bottles or 12 bottles is a perfect way to go.
I agree. I'm a wine geek. I'm a winemaker. It's just, it's part and parcel of what I do. So I love watching a wine's evolution. So when I go out and buy wine with the intent to age, we buy at a minimum of 3 bottles and preferably 6. 1 or 2 of those you have in the first year or 2. Then you use that to gauge when to open the next round, maybe 5 or 6 years out. You use those bottles to gauge when the end of its life may come. And for great wines of the world, that might be 25 years. It's okay. I got time.
So I would suggest one other thing, and then we're going to come to a commercial break, It's very often that people don't have a palate for wine. It took me years to really develop a palate for wine. But one way I think really makes sense is to buy Cadence and buy a less expensive wine and taste at the same meal, both together, and taste and see which you prefer. And it may be you prefer the cheap wine. I preferred the expensive. That's terrible.
Comparisons are always wonderful, A/B comparisons, because you don't have to rely on your taste memory. You have a direct comparison sitting right in front of you. Yeah. And that's a great way to figure out what you like.
So Cadence Winery, look up the website and try some. If you can make it in October, go see what they're doing there in South Park in Seattle.
We would love to see you at the winery.
It's great to do. We're coming to a commercial break. Don't go away. I like wine. I like baseball. I like so many things about life. Life is to be enjoyed. And I hope you're enjoying life. I hope you enjoy wine. And if not, try a few bottles and develop. We'll be right back after this commercial break. Don't go away.
More about money coming up with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. About Money continues. Remember the website, adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
So I want to take you back to begin the segment of the program, take you back to the beginning of the 20th century, 1900. It was not a time you wouldn't find automobiles on the street. What you'd find is horses. And for every horse, or for every 10 to 20 residents of every city, you had at least one horse. And every horse produced 30 to 50 pounds of manure and 2 quarts of urine every single day. The largest cities, like New York City, had hundreds of thousands of horses and piles of manure that were 40 and 50 and 60 feet high. Thousands of horses would die and be left in the streets, along with goats and pigs and cattle, and they'd be sitting in the street, laying in the street, having died dogs and cats and rats. Sometimes the manure in the streets would be 2 to 3 feet high. You know, you go to movies where it talks about the late 1890s, 1900, 1910, and you have clean streets. That's not the way it really was. Streets 2 to 3 feet deep of manure. Diphtheria, whooping cough, typhoid, typhus, fevers, and diseases, all sorts related to that manure. And it's hard to fathom today what it was like. You watch the TV and the streets are clean. I mean, there were people that actually were self-employed, and what they did is they had a shovel, and for somebody that wanted to cross from one side of the street to the other, they would shovel a path through the manure. That's how they made their money. And with all that, there were conferences, international conferences, with trying to deal with the issues. How are we going to clean the streets? How are we going to make things better? International conferences held around the world to talk about this problem. The manure, the urine, the diseases. You know, as that problem was so prevalent, something happened to change the whole thing. The automobile came along, and that whole issue went away. You know, a decade ago, we were talking about peak oil. There was concern that we were going to reach the peak of oil production, and we were going to not run out of oil, but the amount of oil available was going to continue to decrease and become more and more scarce. Prices were going to go up, and it was going to impact the worldwide growth. According to some, you could hear people talk about a return to the Dark Ages, wars and famines and depressions. Some people were so dire on their predictions of what was going to happen because we were going to be so limited on oil. It reminded me of this whole issue of the manure in the streets in the late 1800s, early 1900s. There's still a growing need for energy and an issue with global warming. I've talked for almost 10 years about the supercycle, a time in which worldwide growth, the GDP, is much larger than average. The first cycle, from 1870 to 1913, driven primarily by the industrialization of the U.S. The second cycle, from 1945 to 1970, driven primarily by the rebuilding of Europe and building of infrastructure in the U.S. The third cycle, driven and expected to be driven by the emerging nations. By 2030, that's not that far away, the expectation is that 93% of the world's middle class will live in those emerging nations. They'll be moving from subsistence to actual consumers. They'll be buying cars and smartphones. They'll be buying computers. They'll be buying all sorts of things. Instead of just living at a bare existence, they're going to be buying things. But as that happens, there's a need for additional energy. By 2015, by 2050, the expectation is there will be twice the demand for energy that exists today. Energy today is a $7 trillion business, almost $8 trillion actually. By then, it should be a $16 or $17 billion business. If you look at all media, which includes this radio station, which includes movies, which includes television, the newspapers, if you look at all of media today, it's about a $1 trillion business, 1/8 the size of what energy is. And there's a challenge with that growth in energy need, and that challenge is as the energy supply energy demand increases, it increases greenhouse gas emissions. I use the example, of what that's doing to global warming is that when you drive your car in the summertime, right now it's 91 degrees. You turn the car air conditioning on, you're at 70 degrees. You drive up to the grocery store or the mall or wherever, get out of the car, your car sits there in the sun. When you come back to it an hour or 2 hours later, it's not 91 degrees inside the car. It's maybe 105 or 110 degrees. What's happened is the sunlight is shining into the car, and part of that energy escapes out, but a lot of it is captured inside the car. So even though the car started at 70 degrees, and even though it's 91 degrees outside, it's going to be 110 or more in your car. That's because the energy is captured there. That is what's happening with global warming. We have the sunlight coming into the U.S. or into the world. It bounces up to the clouds, and that cloud acts like the roof of your car in containing the energy. And so you have the naysayers who say, climate change is coming, but we're withdrawing from the pact in Paris, and the world is going to have a significant problem. I don't think that the problem is going to be as great as expected. Even though we've withdrawn from the Paris Accord, even though there's less emphasis by our government, there still is a worldwide concern. But the other thing that's happening is that the corporate giants have shattered records in buying clean energy worldwide. According to Bloomberg News, those corporate giants have bought 7.2 gigawatts on order, have purchased that in 2018, not counting utilities. That's the equivalent of 11 Grand Coulee dams. And in all of 2017, 5.4 gigawatts. If sales continue at the same pace, 3 times the amount of alternative energy will be purchased by Facebook, AT&T, Norsk Hydro, Alcoa, Microsoft, and Walmart. That is taking away some of the global warming. We've got a whole lot of opportunities. Those are going to present investment opportunities as time goes along. But it's very important to be aware of what's going on. It's a time to focus on the positive and not necessarily all the negative. Next week, I do promise, we will get to rebalancing. I said we would last week. Now we will next week. That's an important aspect of what's going on. And I think it's a negative impact on a lot of portfolios. To give you a little preview, the idea is to buy low, sell high. Rebalancing, you sell what's going up and buy back what's going down. Anyway, that's a little preview for what's coming next week. We've had a good program. Do buy Cadence Wine. And I'll be back next week to talk about money.
Listening to About Money with Mike Adams, a registered investment advisor. If you'd like more information about what you heard today, or about Mike's investment philosophy and strategy, or if you'd like Mike to evaluate your own portfolio, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com. The information shared in the preceding program was for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. Join us again next Saturday at noon for more About Money with Mike Adams, here on AM 1590. The Answer. The preceding program was sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts.